Before I start, of course, I'd like to thank Christine Tome and the Ashkal Alwan team for the invitation and the hospitality. I'm delighted to be part of a thought-provoking program such as this. And also, I'd like to make an open declaration of love to some people, such as Zeynep Öz, Alev Ersan, Meltem Ahıska, Hazal Halavut, and the Beş Harfler team for their invaluable contribution to the writing of this talk. So, I would like to begin at the two rivers and one bed in the title of my talk. There's a saying in Turkish, iki arada bir derede, which is roughly translated as between a rock and a hard place, pointing to a dilemma, having to choose between two equally undesirable options. If I were to make a literal translation, though, I must say to be stuck between two gaps in one river. Now, in Turkish, this saying is used in two ways, the first being the one that I just mentioned, and the second is making something, going through a very difficult, managing to do something engrossed in a very difficult position. And it could have a timely character, such as I did this in such a short clustered amount of time, or it could also mean I did something within very precarious and pressing conditions. So in light of the recent events of the past few years, I wanted to turn this saying on its head and ask once again the pressing question among people who would like to change the way things are run. How can we break the trap that we're constantly being stuck between, being stuck between the two undesirable options, neither of which is acceptable or preferable? And how will we remain as our own rivers and flow together in a riverbed that defies both sides? Well, you're all familiar with the binaries. I just got hot, sorry. You can either be black or white. You can either die or live on a minimum wage in a shanty town. You can either stay and fight a civil war or leave to become a refugee. You can either be prey or predator, the victorious or the loser, the hero or the villain. Are you natural or unnatural? Do you look young or not? Because aging is not permissible anymore. You alien or local? Are you an urbanite or a provincial? Are you ruled by the intellect or the body? Are you a man or a woman? And if you're a woman, are you a mother or a whore? And if you're a man, are you a man or a sissy? But the fact is that river does not count fingers. The ways in which we make meaning are so much more complex that as soon as something finds a form, it also no longer is. This is the constant battle with the self. Things change all the time. If we spare a second to pause, we would know. And yet, here we are in desperate expectation for some change to happen. Perhaps a community that manifests best this battle between a form and self is the trans community. My desire to be woman and man at the same time or at different times, and my desire to be neither comes to life here. About 3 years ago, a few friends and I, we started an online magazine that tries to break the stereotypical ideas of who women are and what their interests are. And so we publish on a whole range of subjects. And it's an open magazine, and everyone and anyone can contribute. But one of our regular contributing writers, Ganimet, who's a brilliant writer, she's a trans woman, and to me, when she writes, the world shakes to the core. I find refuge in her constant scrutiny of the world, her political incorrectness, her fierce fight in keeping her community together in a place that is not defined by the state apparatus. Thus, she's an ardent critic of the movement that she comes from. For instance, she believes that the terms LGBTQ are another way of dividing and thus normalizing people. In one of her pieces, she writes, "In the past, we would cut ourselves in order to avoid arrest. 3 of us could shake down the police station. I remember all those things we would do. The police was so afraid of us. They did not know where to put us, and the gendarmerie would not take us either. We would come together and bring down a street mafia. Yes, we all abused alcohol and drugs, but we always managed to stay together, either in living or getting beaten. We did not know trans woman, trans man, trans lesbian, gay, bi, etc. We were the outcasts, and we were all one. In this oneness, we established new forms of living as well as fucking. Anybody could fuck anyone else. Tags brought about oppression. First, they divided us into gay, bi, trans. Each letter became a chain to normalize us, and we all got our share. We're being destroyed. This can stand as a literary critique on its own, but as a societal one too, it works brilliantly. I do not bring up the subject as to give an example of extremity, but more like direct a challenge to the drawing of lines, even if for progressive reasons, around our constantly changing selves and the plurality of we's we form. Within the political struggle, each of these letters has its place, of course. However, some of us must also remind us of the danger and the dream. Some of us must demonstrate the degrees of separation between us that are created by the very mechanism that grinds us all. The outcasts are the mirrors we look into every single day, but strive so hard to cover and be led astray as through a million screens and images in which we are besieged. In his poem Rand Howl, binaries are the wheels of what Allen Ginsberg calls the machinery of night. It goes like this. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of night. A machinery that appropriates the starry night which people like Ganimet try to unravel. The night is written off for the dangerous, the beggar, the mad, the sex worker, the refugee, shady people. Many have been made vulnerable based on some weakness that is deemed as innate and total. There are many faces to sovereignty and uses of power, and today they have multiplied even more with intensified measures of safety and security. They tell us who we should fear and where we can find protection. We, the decent, abiding citizens, who deserve to live in dignity as opposed to the others, which belong to the juggernaut of the night. But I have to go back a bit to illustrate how and what types of divisions came to govern our lives, and I hope you'll bear with me in some history. A strong trend in historiography is complicit in this process of essentializing and severing. And on the flip side of the coin, we keep hearing the word revolution. Revolution will bring down the system. But the revolution will come from good revolutionaries. Why? In How Societies Remember, Paul Connerton writes, in imagining what a historic beginning might be like, the modern imagination has turned back again and again to the events of the French Revolution. This historic rupture, more than any other, has assumed for us the status of a modern myth. All reflection on history on the continent of Europe throughout the 19th century looks behind it to the moment of that revolution in which the meaning of revolution itself was transformed from a circularity of movement to the advent of the new. I can say this for Turkey. Often the way revolution is used points to what Connerton tries to deconstruct. I think this resonates with many other societies, since Eurocentric historical imagination has dominated the writing of history throughout the 19th century and into the present day. This advent of the new severs and encapsulates a certain past. The most obvious manifestation of it is the building of a national history with clear and uniform blocks, which rises in constant economic progress and man-made advance. Today, I hear many people say that the Gezi Park uprising, which took place in 2013 and grew into the country, is defeated. And that makes me wonder, what is defeat? Allen intervenes. I love this line, but I don't want to do injustice to it. Let's see. Victory, forget your underwear, we're free. Is Gezi a victory? Is it a defeat? Or are we buying into a grand discourse of war, where one is always the winner and the other is the loser, and there's nothing in between, no nuances, no fine analysis, and of course, absolutely no credit to what is being cultivated in processes such as the ones created by the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, Occupy movements, Arab uprisings, Youth Stink, etc. These movements are easily crossed off, and unfortunately, they're sometimes crossed off by the very people who create them. Now, the following verses are from a beloved poet, Gülten Akın, who we lost just this past week. Oh, no one's got the time to stop and give thought to fine things. With broad brushstrokes, they move along, sketching homes, kids, graves onto the world. Some are obviously lost when a rhyme starts up. With one look, they shut it all out, and the rhyme enters the night as fine things do. Fine things enter the night, a night that is akin to Ginsberg's, a night that has been drilled, nailed, mechanized. In Gezi, we saw many people of the older generation who lived through the revolutionary times of the 60s re-emerge. They said, oh, those were the days. We almost made a revolution then, but it fell apart. We were defeated. We will win this time. I wanted to ask them, who is the we? Gezi is nothing like you, but Gezi is also possible because of you. Gezi was the first time in the history of Turkey where the LGBTQ movement was widely present, claiming a strong political voice and visibility. Gezi was the moment in which we raided the streets and crossed off misogynist, homophobic, transphobic slogans, curses, and graffiti. On the streets, when people shouted out slogans that offended us, we objected and corrected them, and they switched. At first, they were caught off guard, but apologized. These encounters were precious and unique, and these were possible because of previous moments of ruptures. But to me, more importantly, because of years of hard work and daily struggle on the streets, at home, at work, school, etc. So I'd like to suggest that history is cumulative, and the word cumulative comes from cumulus, an accumulated mass of clouds that constantly shift places and shapes. A cumulus is dense and fluffy. It has mounds, towers, and flat bases, and varying densities. Sometimes it appears to hang still in the air, and at other times it rushes to its destination. It rises, it descends, clears away, then obscures. It's made of shades and shifts which have causes and consequences that accumulate. This brings me to another period in history through which capitalism was born. Silvia Federici, in her pioneering book Caliban and the Witch, demonstrates how the witches that have been burnt on the stake for roughly 3 centuries were the building blocks of capitalism. Giving revolution its due context, she writes, capitalism itself was a counter-revolution against feudalism and its crisis, with a process that is not mysterious. To paraphrase her, in capitalist society, sexual identity becomes the carrier of specific work functions. First, there is the development of a new sexual division of labor, as in women were banned from certain professions and guilds that they could previously be a part of. Second, the mechanization of the proletarian body, starting with the repression of desires, emotions, forms of behavior, which later on developed as an antagonism between body and the mind. Body being cast off as a machine that must give certain results in the work discipline of capitalist production. Third, the construction of a new patriarchal order based upon the exclusion of women from waged work and their subordination to men. So women's work being redefined increasingly in the terrain of the house. Without pay, of course, because it's their natural destiny that they need to fulfill. And I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, there was a very interesting protest in Spain. Grandmothers took to the streets because of their children's hard work. They had to babysit their grandchildren. And they were saying, we can't live our lives because we have to, we're constantly home babysitting our grandchildren and we don't get pay and this is unfair. So fourth and the last, the transformation of women's bodies into machines for the production of new workers, such as the pronatal policies. I guess it was 2 years ago when the president of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, said that it's a patriotic act to bring at least 3 children to life for the prosperity of the country. So housework, for instance, is not a legacy or leftover from a pre-capitalist era, but is a particular type of activity that in its social relations had been constructed by capitalism, argues Federici. And if this is the case, then gender should not be considered a purely cultural reality, but should be treated as a specification of class relations. Capitalism deepened and fastened a more violent attack on women, their mental, intellectual, and bodily practices, which reproduces itself day and night in varying degrees determined by race, class, sexual orientation, religion. But let us widen this frame from femicide to gendercide. On a daily basis, many are killed for being a penetrable body in an improper way. So if we're to talk about a truly radical mass movement, we must transcend the dichotomy between gender and class. This is necessary both for analyses of historical transformations, but also for creating sustainable solutions as a response to the system at large. So for our online magazine that I just mentioned, we like conducting interviews. And one of the people we interviewed was a Kurdish politician, Sebat Tuncel, who is now facing multiple lawsuits for aiding and making propaganda for a terrorist organization. In the interview, she told us how she grew up in a politicized Alevi Kurdish family rooted in a strong socialist background. Here's what she said. It took me many years to see that the issue of women is nothing close to what we're taught, that the system estranges one even to her own body. Yes, in the family, my relatives constantly said men and women are equals. But what does that mean exactly? What does that entail? You don't connect the issue of women and gender at large with issues of colonial power, repression, capitalism, etc. You keep reproducing the traditional roles of man and women without much scrutiny of the whole system, including this struggle that you're a part of. So later, as you go into local struggle, you start seeing how these are fundamentally connected. Another woman that we interviewed was Halime Yusuf, another Kurdish politician who's the foreign affairs spokesperson for the Yekitiye Star. Yekitiye Star is the Kurdish women's struggle in Afrin, a canton within Rojava, which borders Turkey and lies on the Syrian side. She said something similar. I was politically active since the age of 14 because of my Kurdish identity, but my consciousness regarding my womanhood came much later. In What Does a Woman Want? Writing and Sexual Difference, Shoshana Fellman discusses women's impossible autobiography. Proceeding from the fact that women have been trained to view themselves as objects, she writes, their own story is thus often alien and unavailable to their own consciousness. I just gave 2 examples of 2 highly political women, but I can enumerate these outside of the Kurdish struggle. Just 2 weeks ago, women in Kerala, which is southwest India, took to the streets. These are women who are working at tea plantations owned by a British company called Canaan Devon Hills Plantations. They occupied the Munnar city center, they blocked traffic, they blocked life, and because they just could not take the unacceptable conditions of work and life anymore. As Lissi Sunny, one of the leading figures of the struggle, puts it, we live in conditions that are worse than the cattle. These women live in makeshift homes, they have no proper health care, the maximum salary they can make a month is $76 a month. After the decision of the company to cut their bonus, the women said enough is enough, and they went on strike. And when that wasn't enough, on the 7th day, they went to the city center and occupied it, which finally brought the attention they were seeking for. This move pushed the unions and local governors to approach the women to show their solidarity. However, the women kicked them out. Gomathi, another woman who's part of the strike, said, we don't know who we can trust other than ourselves. All we know is that we won't be exploited by more people. We're not demanding anything luxurious. All we want is decent pay and food to sustain ourselves. Now, the result is that they regain their bonus pay and plus a 20% increase in salaries. The union, along with the company, has to sign the contract. But most importantly, this movement leads to a much more unfolding of events. Across Kerala, many women who work in other sectors start their own struggles. And some columnists call this the women's Jasmine revolution. It seems that through the struggle that they've put forth, these women have gained more consciousness about the many layers of oppression they've been subjected to. They connected to each other, which then connected to many other women struggling in other lines of businesses. And this condition of the Kerala women strikes home right here as well. The muzzles that we struggle to destroy are made of the same material in the factories in which we work. In getting to the roots of radical politics today, Zygmunt Bauman writes, instant solutions, however extraordinary and bold, are essentially conservative, intended to restore the conditions responsible for the crisis. For that reason, they cannot come anywhere near the roots of the trouble and therefore fail to prevent the crisis from returning with a vengeance. Now, Bauman has a right. The gains of the Kerala women will not uproot the system. It will not push back the capitalist agenda. It does not do these. However, if we think of what Sebat Tuncal, Halime Yusuf, Gomathi, and Lissi Sani, what they said together, we see that they point us in a direction that is not seen by Bauman. And that is the actual realization and consciousness of the vital connection between long histories of colonialism, capitalism, to gender-based oppression. And without their realization, critique of radical thought will always fail to get close to the roots of the problem, and thus the ways that we can uproot them. These are ruptures that build the connection between bodies, senses, emotions, and sexuality to the formation of the socioeconomic relations and politics we operate in. What are often seen as different and separate issues, in fact, are linked the way that water undercurrents are linked. If we can build the connections, we can organize much more effectively and build politics that is based on co-resistance between various local struggles. Maria Negroni, in a poem in The Night Journey, writes, winding the body's lexicon, it hit me in the takeaway. Shown my treasure in nothing, I wavered. Submit or escape? It's a question of what is lost in the beat of a voluptuous skirt. What battle is evaded? What dire, endearing enemy abandoned? Here, I'd like to turn to Federici's Caliban and the Witch again, and I'd like to point out that it came out only a decade ago. The two questions she poses in the book are, first, why is the witch hunt one of the most brutal and least recorded massacres of history? Second, what is supposed to be eliminated when these women are condemned to the stake? And from here, we can add, why and how is it possible to draw a parallel between the witches and the black slaves of the plantations in the US and America, the so-called sporadic attacks by young men who take their guns and raid schools, refugees who are more likely to be gripped by schizophrenia? Is schizophrenia just a biological condition? Or Palestinian women targeted because they're, to crudely reiterate what the Israeli state and many other states see them as, life forces. In Maria Wies's words, violence itself becomes the most productive force. Torture and death are placed at the service of life. All these people's histories, but especially women's histories, have been obscured and discarded as not that important within the larger cause owned by various political formations. There's a constant attempt to burn, dig, and bury voices that fall out of the borders of imperialist patriarchy. We can enumerate the examples on a global scale across centuries. I'd like to note, of course, all of them have their own particular manifestations and the context in which they're born, and there surely are many people challenging, defying, and surviving in these difficult conditions. What I'd like to emphasize, though, is this lack of addressing directly and taking to heart the issue of gendercide. Without it, we fail at any possibility of building a sustainable coalition of movements that challenge the deleterious political abyss. In the same essay, Zygmunt Bauman continues, What is joyously and foolishly forgotten is that the nature of human suffering is determined by the way humans live. The roots of the currently lamented pain, like the roots of all social evil, are sunk deep in our mode of life by our carefully cultivated and by now ingrained habit of running for consumer credit whenever there's a problem to face or a difficulty to bypass. Ginsberg roars on. What sphinx of cement and aluminum bashed open their skulls and ate up their brains and imagination? What is lost? What must be retrieved in this mode of life that Bauman talks about? What direction should we run in habit? The way to answering these questions bring me to the heart of the issue of memory and its relationship to collectivized or connected memories. Memory is an interesting area of exploration because it moves in and out of personal and public spaces, sometimes in the logic of a dream and at others as witness accounts, sketching fragments of our lives. I would like to come back to the body again, but this time it's the body of fruits and vegetables that I'd like us to think about. How many of us can taste fruits of our childhood? Do we even remember what they taste like? Think of the peaches, apples, pears, whose tastes have diminished somehow, or the many fruits and vegetables that have gone extinct and missing from our markets unnoticed. Instead, we see a stealthy appearance of exotic fruits like kiwi, avocado, passion fruit, etc. Don't get me wrong, I love avocado and passion fruit and kiwi, but I also do lament those 22 types of pears and the 1 meter long lettuce that used to grow in Istanbul, which have disappeared unnoticed, but only to the gardener. On the flip side of the coin, we live in a world where certain species of plants are considered alien, invasive, to the native original habitat. Same goes for animals. And so they're annihilated by the thousands and millions through the use of tons of chemicals, which has established one of the biggest pseudo markets today. So where do our history connect with that of the soils, the mulberries, the water? What line separates the inside from the outside, the rumble of the wheels from the howl of the wolves? How is it that local fruits and vegetables disappear unnoticed? What kind of change does that mean in the way we remember and understand ourselves? What happens to life? What happens to historical imagination when sensual memory is gone? When old people say, the taste of my mouth is gone, are they only referring to an age-related problem, or is there something more to it? As in a lost connection to the senses, to the land, and therefore to the making of a whole set of relations and worlds. And in a way, by recognizing that loss, I think they prove to be sharper than the young. Peaches are never peaches. They're markers of time. They're bodies in which we connect to the world in a very real, sensual way. Rebecca Solnit, in A Field Guide to Getting Lost, writes, "Of course, to forget the past is to lose the sense of loss that is also memory of an absent richness and a set of clues to navigate the present by. So a peach is also a clue to navigate the present by. It's a spaceship by which we travel in time and imagine a past, a present, and a self among many. I wonder if there might be another idea of human order than repression, another notion of human virtue than self-control, and another kind of human self than the one based on dissociation of inside and outside, or indeed another human essence than self. I did not bring up the issue of the soil, water, and gender together for no reason. These are precisely the life forces that imperial colonial systems try to empty out, both in meaning and in reality. And therefore, to remember what has been dismembered is a painful but necessary process. That mourning is precisely what connects us to each other, but also to the people who lived on this earth before us and what they carried over to the present. So I would like to leave you with 2 questions, with the hope that in the challenge of answering them, we might just get closer to the roots of radical transformation we need today. What do you remember of the earth, and who's responsible for the suffering of your mother? Thank you. So any comments, questions? Welcome.